The rain had a voice that night, a voice that whispered through the valley and spoke to something deep inside Elira's heart. It came without warning, soft at first, then fierce and relentless, turning the forest paths into rivers of silver mud. The healer sat by her window, her candle flickering in the storm's breath, listening to the sound of the world breaking open. It was a lonely sound, one she knew too well. In her little cabin at the edge of Arvindale, loneliness was an old companion, as familiar as the smell of herbs drying from the rafters or the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet. Lightning carved the sky apart, revealing the dark bones of the forest. Then she heard it, faint at first, almost swallowed by the storm. A cry. It wasn't human, yet it wasn't fully beast either. It carried pain deep and raw, as if the forest itself was bleeding. Elira's heart stilled. She reached for her cloak and lantern, her fingers trembling not from fear but from the strange pull in her chest. A healer's duty was never quiet. Pain called, and she always answered. The rain struck her like 1,000 tiny needles as she stepped into the night. The wind tore at her cloak, her lantern flickering against the darkness. The forest was alive with whispers, the trees bending under the storm's weight. She followed the sound, her boots sinking into the wet earth until she saw it. A massive shape sprawled across the ground near the old stone path, half covered by fallen leaves and rain. A wolf, large enough to be mistaken for a bear, its fur silver beneath the lightning. Blood stained the earth around it. Elira froze, her breath caught between awe and fear. The creature was magnificent even in its suffering. Its flank rose and fell shallowly, an arrow buried deep in its side. The wound was fresh, the blood bright and hot in the rain. Someone had hunted it recently, and cruelly, she knelt slowly, keeping her movements steady. The wolf's eyes snapped open, golden and piercing, glowing like twin suns in the storm. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Those eyes weren't wild. They were intelligent, ancient even. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I won't hurt you." The wolf didn't growl. It only watched her wary and weak. She reached into her satchel, pulling out a small knife to break the arrow's shaft. The moment the wood snapped, the wolf flinched, teeth flashing in pain, but it didn't attack. Elira worked quickly, her hands steady despite her racing heart. She whispered old words her mother once taught her. Words meant to calm frightened creatures, to steady the pulse between healer and wounded. When the arrow came free, the blood welled up fast. She pressed her cloth against the wound, feeling the wolf's heartbeat under her palm, strong, stubborn, alive. "Stay with me," she murmured. The storm raged around them, lightning illuminating the forest like a cathedral of light and shadow. She tied the bandage tight, whispering, "You'll live." By the time she dragged him back to her cabin, her body was trembling from exhaustion. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, nearly stumbling as she pulled him inside. The fire she had left smoldering still burned low. She threw dry wood into the hearth, coaxing it back to life, the orange light spilling warmth across the room. The wolf lay motionless on the rug, his breath ragged but steady. Elira fetched her herbs, willow bark for pain, yarrow for bleeding, sage for fever, and began to work. Her fingers brushed against his fur, smooth as silk despite the rain. The scent of the forest clung to him, wild, clean, and strangely familiar. As she ground the herbs into a paste, she couldn't stop glancing at him. His presence filled the room, both powerful and fragile. He looked like something from the old tales her grandmother used to tell, the ones about wolves that walked as men when the moon was full. When his breathing deepened into sleep, she sat back and watched him. The firelight painted his silver coat with shades of gold and amber. "Who hurt you?" she whispered. "And why does it feel like I've known you before?" Her voice barely reached her own ears. Outside, the storm softened, the rain becoming a hush over the roof. Elira leaned against the chair, exhaustion pulling at her. The wolf twitched once in his sleep, a low sound rumbling in his chest. Not quite a growl, almost a word. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw his shape shimmer in the firelight, as though his outline blurred, not fur but skin, not claws but hands. She blinked hard, but the vision faded. Only the wolf remained. She stayed beside him through the night, feeding the fire whenever it dimmed. At some point, sleep claimed her. When she woke, the dawn had turned the world pale gold. The air was quiet, too quiet. The hearth had gone cold. She sat up quickly, her pulse spiking. The blanket she had draped over him lay empty. Her eyes darted around the cabin. No sign of him. The bandages she had tied were gone, the door slightly ajar, the morning light spilling through. Elira stepped outside, the cold air biting her skin. The forest glistened with dew, birds singing softly as though the storm had never come. The only sign of the night before was a trail of muddy footprints leading toward the trees, large, deliberate, too human to belong to any beast. She stood there for a long moment, her breath misting in the dawn. Something deep within her stirred, a quiet certainty that this wasn't over, that she hadn't just saved a wolf's life, but had stepped into a story much older than herself. A faint breeze carried a scent through the air, rain, earth, and the wild musk of him. Her fingers brushed the spot on her wrist where his blood had touched her skin. It tingled faintly, warm beneath her pulse. The forest beyond her home felt different now, awake somehow, watching. Elira turned back toward her cabin, her thoughts heavy with questions she couldn't name. Who was he? What kind of creature bled like a man but healed like a legend? She looked once more toward the forest path, a shiver running through her. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she touched that wounded wolf, her quiet life had ended. Fate had already taken her hand, leading her toward a world hidden beneath moonlight and shadow, a world where love would cost everything. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let's begin. The forest had a silence that only came after rain, a silence thick enough to hold memories. Elira moved through it carefully, gathering the herbs that had survived the storm. The earth was damp beneath her fingers, the scent of pine and wet soil clinging to her hands. Each step reminded her of the night before, of golden eyes and the strange warmth that had stayed long after the wolf disappeared. She had dreamed of him again, the silver fur, the wounded gaze, the feeling that something ancient had looked back at her from beneath the rain. She told herself it was just a dream, a trick of exhaustion and moonlight. Yet the mark on her wrist still tingled faintly, as though the blood she touched had left behind a whisper that wouldn't fade. The villagers would call it foolishness if she spoke of it. They already thought her strange. The solitary healer who lived beyond the river, who spoke to plants and read meaning in the wind. In Arvindale, strangeness was never safe. Still, when an old man arrived that morning with a fevered child in his arms, Elira did what she always did. She opened her door, lit the hearth, and set about her work. Her life had always been like this, measured in herbs, in quiet prayers whispered over broken skin. She knew the rhythm of pain and healing better than she knew her own heartbeat, but today, her hands felt heavier. Her thoughts kept drifting to that impossible creature, the wounded wolf, who had vanished like mist at dawn. The villagers spoke of beasts in the forest again, shadows moving too close to the farms, strange tracks in the mud. A trader passing through said there was talk of unrest in the northern mountains, of packs breaking treaties and roaming beyond their borders. Elira listened quietly, though she said nothing. Inside, a slow unease grew. Could it be him? Could he still be near? That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind brushed against her window like a hand seeking entry, carrying faint sounds from the forest, the distant cry of a wolf, low and mournful. She rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The moon hung low and pale, washing the trees in silver light. Somewhere beyond the hills, something answered that call. The sound pierced her chest, both beautiful and aching. She walked to the edge of the clearing where the forest began. The night air was cold, brushing against her skin, and the world felt poised between peace and warning. Her eyes caught movement near the stream, a flash of silver gone as quickly as it appeared. She froze. A kale. The name came unbidden, slipping from her lips before she could think. She didn't know where it came from or why it felt right. But as the echo of her voice faded, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The next morning, she found signs that someone or something had been near her home. Footprints in the soft earth, too large for any man, yet too precise for an animal. The air inside her cabin carried a faint trace of musk and ash, and on her table, a single feather, gray tipped with silver, lay beside her herbal jars. Her heart stuttered. She hadn't left it there. Elira sat down slowly, the feather trembling in her hands. Was it a warning? A gift? Or something else entirely? A reminder that she wasn't imagining what she felt. Her thoughts circled endlessly. If the wolf had survived, if he was still somewhere in those woods, then why come so close only to vanish again? She spent the day pretending life was normal, tending to her patients and brewing tonics, but the world had changed its shape. The forest no longer felt like home. It felt like it was watching her. As dusk fell, she caught sight of a stranger in the distance, tall, cloaked, walking along the ridge that overlooked her valley. The fading light caught a glint of something metallic at his throat, a pendant perhaps, shaped like a crescent moon. She watched until he disappeared beyond the trees, her heart drumming an uneven rhythm. When night came, she sat by her fire, the feathers still on the table beside her. The flames cast long shadows across the walls, dancing like echoes of the past. She thought of her mother's stories, the ones about men who could wear the skin of wolves, cursed to roam between worlds until the moon forgave them. Back then, she'd laughed at those tales. Now she wasn't so sure. She tried to read, but the letters blurred on the page. Her mind returned again and again to the memory of that night, the warmth of his breath, the strength beneath her hands, the way his eyes had met hers not as predator and prey, but as something equal. The forest outside was alive again, restless, whispering secrets through the wind. Then she heard it, the softest knock at her door, 3 taps, deliberate and calm. She rose slowly, her pulse thrumming in her ears. No one came to her cabin after dark. She reached for the small knife she kept near the hearth, her fingers trembling. "Who's there? Who's there?" she called, but only silence answered. She opened the door a crack. No one stood outside. Only the cold night air greeted her, carrying the scent of rain and pine. Her eyes swept the clearing, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no shadow, just a small bundle lying on her doorstep. She bent down and picked it up, her heart tightening. Wrapped in rough cloth was a piece of silver jewelry, an amulet shaped like a wolf's head. She turned it over in her hand, her breath catching as moonlight glimmered off its surface. It was warm, as though someone had held it moments before. Beneath the metal, faint letters were carved in a language she didn't know. But she felt the weight of it, the connection, the unspoken message it carried. Somewhere deep in the forest, a wolf howled, long, low, and mournful. This time, Elara didn't look away. She stood at her door until the last echo faded into the trees. The amulet pressed against her heart, and the certainty settled over her like the falling night. He was alive, and he was watching her. The river had always been her place of peace, the only place where the noise of her thoughts could quiet enough for her to breathe. Morning mist clung low to the water, turning everything pale and dreamlike. Elara knelt at the edge, rinsing her herbs, the chill biting at her fingers. Yet beneath the calm, something felt altered. Ever since the amulet had appeared on her doorstep, she had not known a single night of restful sleep. It now hung around her neck, warm against her skin as though it carried a heartbeat of its own. She had told herself she would take it to the village, perhaps sell it, or return it if someone claimed it. But each time she tried to remove it, her hands faltered. Something deep within whispered that it was meant to stay. The days since the storm had passed quietly, yet the forest no longer felt like the same place. The air carried a tension she could neither see nor name. She often caught the faint rustle of footsteps when none should be there, or glimpses of silver movement between the trees that vanished when she turned. The sound of the river filled her mind until it was broken by something else. A low groan carried by the wind. Elara's head snapped up. It came again, strained and human this time. Her heart quickened. Without thinking, she grabbed her satchel and followed the sound along the bank. The mist thickened as she moved, wrapping around her like breath. Then, through the shifting veil of gray, she saw him. A man lay half submerged near the bend where the current slowed, his clothes torn, his body marked with scratches that glimmered faintly beneath the light. She rushed to him, kneeling by his side. His skin was cold, his pulse weak, but present. Dark hair clung wetly to his brow, and when she brushed it aside, she froze. His eyes opened, golden, bright, and impossible. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. Then his gaze softened, though pain flickered behind it. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, his voice low, rough, and edged with exhaustion. "You're hurt," she replied quietly. "Let me help you." He tried to rise but winced, clutching his side. The motion revealed a deep gash near his ribs, half-healed but not human in its pattern. She recognized it immediately, the same wound she had dressed on the wolf that stormy night. A shiver ran through her. "You?" He met her stare but said nothing. For a long moment, only the river spoke between them, its steady murmur filling the silence that her heart could no longer bear. "Who are you?" she asked finally. "Free traveler," he said after a pause. "One who shouldn't have come this far." His tone was guarded, yet his eyes betrayed something deeper, a sadness that pulled at her, as though he carried centuries of solitude behind that calm. She helped him to his feet, feeling the strange heat that radiated through his soaked shirt. His strength surprised her. Even wounded, he moved with the grace of someone who belonged to the wild. She brought him to her cabin, his arm resting lightly over her shoulder. Frau. When they crossed the threshold, a spark of recognition flickered in his eyes as though he'd been there before. She lit the fire and guided him to the chair near it. The light revealed more than she expected. Scars, old and new, mapping his skin like constellation. "I've seen eyes like yours before," she said softly. He glanced toward her, expression unreadable. "Then you've wandered too close to things you shouldn't know." "I'm a healer," she replied. "I don't choose what fate sends to my door." He didn't answer, only watched the flames dance. The silence between them was not empty. It was alive, humming with the weight of things unspoken. When she brought him a bowl of warm broth, he accepted it without a word, though his hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. "Less now," he murmured. "You have a gift." His gaze met hers, and for a moment the firelight caught his pupils, reflecting gold. Not just for healing, she looked away quickly, the warmth of his stare unsettling her. "Full underst. I'll bring fresh herbs for your wounds." As she turned, he reached out, his fingers brushing her wrist, the same spot that had tingled since the night of the storm. The touch sent a pulse of heat through her, faint but undeniable. She met his eyes again, and for the briefest instant she saw the wolf, silver fur, golden gaze, the memory of rain on his back. Then it was gone. She drew in a breath. "Who are you really?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Someone who's already taken too much of your kindness." He rose, unsteady but determined. "Thank you, healer. You should forget you ever found me." Before she could respond, he moved toward the door. She followed, words caught between confusion and fear. The wind rushed in as he opened it, scattering the fire's warmth. "You'll die out there," she said, her voice breaking through the storm of thoughts in her head. He paused at the threshold, turning slightly. The wind caught his hair, revealing a faint scar along his jaw, the same shape as the wound she had seen on the wolf's muzzle. "Not tonight," he whispered. "The forest still owes me that much." And then he was gone, swallowed by the mist. Elira stood in the doorway long after, the air thick with the scent of rain and ash. Her heart refused to steady. She looked down at her wrist, where his touch had left a faint glow beneath her skin, fading like a heartbeat. The amulet around her neck pulsed once, as if answering it. She closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut, breath trembling. Everything inside her screamed that this was only the beginning, that the stranger by the river was no stranger at all, and whatever had bound their fates together was awakening once more beneath the pale light of the moon. The nights that followed blurred into one another, steeped in the soft glow of firelight and the whisper of rain beyond her windows. Elira didn't expect to see him again. Yet on the second night, as the moon hung thin above the forest, the door creaked open. He stood there, damp from the mist, his cloak torn, the same unreadable calm in his eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he was an illusion, some trick of longing conjured by loneliness. But then he spoke, his voice low and tired. "You said your door was open to those in need. I may have to take you at your word." He carried no weapon, no threat, only exhaustion. Without a word, she moved aside. The fire welcomed him with a quiet hiss as he stepped into the room, and for the first time, the air between them felt less like danger and more like something inevitable. She handed him a towel, her fingers brushing his as he took it. The contact lingered, neither of them moving away. "You never said your name," she said softly. He hesitated, the silence long enough to make her wonder if he'd answer at all. "A Kale," he said finally. Just Kale. The simplicity of it didn't fool her. It was the kind of name spoken by men who carried too many truths to reveal any of them. Still, she nodded, choosing not to press further. He sank into the chair by the fire, his gaze unfocused, as though watching memories only he could see. They spoke little that night. The sound of rain filled the spaces between their silences. She made him tea from valerian root, the same her mother had used to calm restless spirits. When she placed the cup before him, their eyes met again, and in that glance, she saw the faintest trace of gratitude, raw, unguarded, gone too quickly to be certain. In the days that followed, Kale stayed. He offered no reason, and Elira did not ask for one. He helped mend the roof, carried water from the well, and sometimes simply watched the forest as though expecting it to strike. There was a stillness in him that felt both human and not. A constant awareness beneath his calm exterior. The wolves in the woods had gone silent since his return, as if bowing to something unseen. One evening, she found him outside near the stream, sleeves rolled up, washing blood from his hands. The water shimmered dark in the fading light. "You're hurt again," she said, approaching. "It's not mine," he murmured. Her stomach tightened. Then whose? He didn't answer. Only his reflection trembled in the water, his golden eyes catching the last rays of the sun like molten metal. There are things moving in these woods that shouldn't be," he said at last. "Totally. And there are men who hunt what they don't understand." His voice carried a quiet anger, the kind that came from old wounds. Elora wanted to ask if he meant himself, but the look in his eyes silenced her. Instead, she stepped closer and took his hand, ignoring the faint tremor in her own. His skin was fever-warm, the pulse beneath her fingers too strong for a man who claimed to be mortal. "Then let me help," she said gently. "You already have." His gaze softened for just a moment, but there was sorrow behind it, a distance she couldn't cross. "You don't know what it means to help me." He pulled away before she could reply, walking back toward the cabin as twilight deepened. She followed quietly, feeling the growing ache of a question that had no safe answer. That night, the forest came alive again. Howls echoed from the distant ridges, deep and mournful, threading through the cold air like a warning. Cale stood by the window, unmoving, his expression unreadable. The firelight gilded his features, sharp, regal, as though carved from something older than time. "You hear them too," she said from behind him. "I always do." His tone was flat, but she caught the edge of something that sounded like grief. "They call for what was lost, for what was taken." He turned then, and for the first time she saw it fully, the faint shimmer beneath his skin, the same glow that had haunted her dreams since the night she found the wolf in the rain. The realization struck her slowly, like dawn breaking through fog. "You're one of them," she whispered. "A wolf." The silence stretched long enough that the fire crackled loudly in the space between them. Cale didn't deny it. His jaw tightened, his eyes turning to the flames. "I was," he said quietly. "Once," her breath caught. "Then the night I found you—" "I shouldn't have let you," he interrupted, his voice rough with something between guilt and longing. "But I was dying, and you were there. No one was meant to know what I am." Elora's heart raced, but not with fear. "And yet you came back." He looked at her then, truly looked, and the firelight seemed to bend around him. "Because you're the first person who didn't see a monster." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. She took a step closer, drawn not by logic, but by something deeper, older, the same pull that had made her kneel beside a dying beast in the rain. Maybe," she said softly, "and because I've been one too, in my own way." Cale's eyes softened, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. For a moment, they stood there, two broken souls bound by secrets neither could fully speak. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the sound of distant howls that neither of them could ignore. Cale's gaze drifted to the window, his expression turning grim once more. "They're searching," he murmured. "For me." Elora's pulse quickened. "Then we have to hide you." His smile was faint, almost sorrowful. "You can't hide a storm alarm." He looked at her then, his golden eyes glowing softly in the firelight. "But thank you for trying." She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, he turned back to the fire, his shadow long and sharp against the wall. The room seemed smaller suddenly, filled with a quiet that carried the weight of what was coming. As the night deepened, she realized the truth she had been avoiding. Whatever destiny had brought him to her door wasn't finished yet. It was only waiting for the next turn of the moon. The night had grown colder, heavier somehow, as if the air itself knew something was coming. The fire in the hearth burned low, its light flickering weakly against the wooden walls. Cale hadn't spoken in hours. He stood by the window, unmoving, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the moon. Elora watched him from the table, pretending to grind herbs she didn't need. Though her hands shook too much to do any real work, the silence between them had shifted since the night of his confession. It was no longer a quiet companionship, but a fragile bridge suspended over something vast and unseen. She wanted to speak, to ask what hunted him, but the look in his eyes held too many answers already. There was distance there, and beneath it, pain, old and endless. The wolves had howled every night since, distant yet never far enough. Each cry felt like a question that only he could understand. Finally, Hale turned from the window. "You should go to the village for a few days," he said quietly. Fee said quietly. "Stay there until the moon passes." Elora set the pestle down, her brows furrowing. "And leave you here alone?" "It isn't safe." His tone carried the weight of command, one that didn't fit the man she had come to know, but something older, something born of authority. "A forest will wake tonight." She stepped closer. "And then tell me what that means. You said they're searching for you." "Who are they, Kale?" "Oh." His jaw tightened. He didn't meet her eyes. "E my kind." The words fell heavy between them. He moved toward the fire, feeding it another log as if the act could delay what was coming. "The Alpha's call," he murmured finally. "It's not something you can ignore." She frowned, confusion mixing with unease. "A call." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the flames. "When the moon reaches its highest point, every wolf bound by blood or oath hears it. It's not sound, it's something deeper, like your soul being pulled by invisible hands. It's how the Alpha commands his pack. Even those who've broken from him can feel it." Ilara's pulse quickened. "And you can feel it now?" He gave a slow nod. "Every moment it grows stronger. I can hear him in my head, summoning me back to the north. The old king doesn't forgive betrayal." She took another step closer, searching his face. "But you said you were exiled. Why call you now?" Kale's gaze lifted, meeting hers for the first time. "Because something's changed. Someone's taken my place." The fire cracked sharply, sending sparks into the air. Ilara's breath caught. There was something terrifying in the calm way he spoke, as though he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying the scent of rain and pine through the cracks in the window. The trees groaned under its weight. Somewhere far in the distance, a single howl broke the silence, deep, long, and filled with power. The sound reverberated through the walls, through the air, through her bones. Kale stiffened, his eyes closed for a moment, his breathing shallow. When he opened them again, the gold in his irises burned brighter, almost inhuman. It's begun. Ilara felt her chest tighten. "What happens now?" He turned toward her, and for the first time she saw fear in him. Not for himself, but for her. "If I don't answer, they'll come for me, and they'll destroy anything that stands between us. Then run," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Go before they find you." He shook his head slowly. "It's too late for that." The room seemed to pulse with energy, faint at first, then stronger, a vibration that hummed through the floorboards, through her body. Kale dropped to one knee, gripping the edge of the table, his teeth clenched. His skin shimmered faintly, the veins beneath glowing like threads of light. "Kale!" She rushed to him, but he lifted a hand, stopping her. "Stay back," he rasped. "The call, it's trying to take control." Ilara froze, watching as his breath came in sharp gasps, his body trembling with the force of something unseen. The shadows around him seemed to move, stretching and warping in the flicker of firelight. She reached for the amulet at her neck instinctively. It burned hot against her skin as though responding to his pain. He looked up, his eyes molten gold now, voice breaking between words. "I fought it once before, but it's stronger now. He knows where I am. Then we'll fight it again," she said, kneeling beside him. Her hand hovered over his shoulder, unsure if she dared touch him. "You're not alone this time." Something in his expression softened, grief and gratitude entwined. His hand brushed hers, just briefly, and the warmth that passed between them felt almost alive. "You don't understand, Ilara. If I answer the call, I become what I was again, a creature bound to his will. But if I resist, what happens if you resist?" she asked, though part of her didn't want the answer. He met her gaze, eyes glinting with quiet resignation. "Then he'll come himself. Void it." Outside, another howl rose, closer now, answered by many more. The sound filled the forest like a storm. The air inside the cabin turned electric, every flame flickering wildly. Ilara stood and moved to the window, staring into the dark. Through the mist, faint shapes moved between the trees, large, silent, deliberate, wolves, dozens of them, circling the clearing. Her breath caught. A Kale. He pushed himself to his feet, his voice low but steady. "They're here." Ilara turned back to him, fear and defiance warring in her chest. "Then let them come. You're not going anywhere." He almost smiled, that faint ghost of a smile she had come to recognize. "You don't know what you're saying." But she did. She knew it with the kind of clarity that only love could bring, the kind that didn't ask for safety, only truth. She stepped closer until she was standing before him, her hand finding his once more. "Whatever they are, whatever comes, I'm not afraid." The howls grew louder, echoing like thunder through the forest. The fire roared as if feeding on the chaos. Kale's eyes softened, though his voice was steady when he whispered. "Then the storm begins tonight. Word count. 10:01, The storm that had begun in the distance finally reached them. The cabin shuddered under the force of wind and thunder, each crash echoing like a drumbeat of something ancient awakening. Elora stood near the window, her pulse quick and unsteady, watching shadows dart between trees as the wolves closed in. Cale stood in the center of the room, shoulders squared, his body trembling not from fear, but from the pull of something invisible. His eyes flickered with gold, his voice rough when he spoke. Once the call begins, it doesn't stop. He won't rest until I kneel again. You don't belong to him, Elora said, stepping closer, her voice barely audible over the storm. You said you were free. Cale laughed softly, bitterly. A freedom is an illusion for those born under the mark. He turned toward her, and for a heartbeat, she saw the truth behind his calm. The glow beneath his skin pulsed brighter, threads of light crawling up his arms like veins of fire. It's how he binds us, he whispered. Every alpha carries the mark of the moon, and every son inherits it. Her breath caught. You're his son? Cale nodded once, the admission heavy. The exiled heir to a throne I never wanted. Lightning flared outside, blinding white for an instant. When the light faded, the forest had gone silent. Not a howl, not a whisper. Only the sound of their breathing filled the room. Cale moved to the door and unlatched it, the wind rushing in. Stay behind me, he said quietly. If they come through that tree line, don't run. They'll only chase you faster. Elora's heart hammered. And what will you do? Whatever I must. The air beyond the cabin rippled, and from the mist stepped a single wolf, massive silver-gray eyes burning like twin suns. It stopped a few paces from the door, head bowed low. Cale's expression darkened. Eloran, he muttered. My father's hound. The wolf shifted, bones twisting, fur receding, until a man stood in its place. A tall figure draped in shadow and rain, his mouth curling into a cruel smile. The Alpha commands your return, he said, voice deep and resonant. Lieutenant, you've run long enough. Cale's body tensed, the mark on his forearm glowing faintly beneath the skin. Tell him I've made my choice. Lauren's grin widened. You know what happens to those who defy the call. His eyes slid to Allura, standing just behind Cale. And the humans they taint. Before he could move, Cale shifted. The transformation was swift and violent, bones lengthening, sinew stretching, fur erupting across his skin. Within seconds, the man was gone, and in his place stood the same silver wolf Allura had healed that night, in the rain. The sight froze her, awe and terror warring in her chest. The two wolves clashed with a sound like thunder splitting the earth. They collided in a blur of teeth and claws, moving faster than her eyes could follow. Allura stumbled backward, the floor trembling beneath her feet. Sparks flew from the hearth as the fire flared and dimmed. The battle spilled outside, their roars echoing through the forest. Elora ran to the doorway, the rain slashing across her face. She could see them in the clearing, Cale fighting with a fury that seemed born of both rage and despair. Laurent was larger, but Cale was faster, every movement precise, his silver coat streaked with blood. The storm raged above them, lightning striking the ground in jagged arcs. Then, with a final snarl, Cale drove Laurent to the ground. The enemy wolf yelped, and for a heartbeat the forest fell silent again. Cale stood over him, chest heaving, his fur soaked in crimson and rain. Laurent's voice came weak but defiant. You can't run forever, Prince. The Alpha's blood binds you. You belong to the moon. Before Elora could blink, Cale's claws flashed, and the sound of tearing flesh cut through the rain. Then it was over. Laurent's body stilled, and Cale turned toward her. His golden eyes glowed in the darkness, wild and unrestrained. She should have been afraid, but something stronger than fear held her in place. Cale, she whispered. He stepped toward her slowly, each movement deliberate, his massive form trembling with exhaustion. She reached out, her hand shaking, and when her fingers brushed his fur, the world seemed to shift. The glow beneath his skin flared again, brighter now, flooding the clearing with silver light. He stumbled, collapsing to his knees as his body began to change back. When it was done, he knelt before her in human form, bare and bleeding, the mark on his arm burning like a brand. Elora dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands over the wound on his shoulder. The heat beneath her palms was unbearable, as though fire lived beneath his skin. What is it? She cried. His voice was hoarse. The moon. It's claiming me again. He looked at her, his expression filled with a kind of desperate tenderness. I tried to fight it, but the bond is blood deep. I can't be free until it's broken. Her tears mingled with the rain. Then let me break it. He shook his head weakly. It can't be undone. It can only be shared. Before she could ask what he meant, he reached for her wrist, his blood-slicked hand trembling. His fingers found the pulse beneath her skin, pressing there with purpose. The mark on his arm flared, and a sliver of its light leapt to her wrist, searing into her flesh. She gasped, pain and heat flooding her veins like liquid fire. Kale, what are you doing? His grip tightened just enough to keep her still. Binding you to me, he whispered. It's the only way to keep him from taking me. The light faded, leaving behind a faint, silver mark beneath her skin, identical to his. She looked down, breathless, the world spinning around her. Kale's eyes dimmed as exhaustion overtook him. Now, if he calls again, he'll hear you too. Elara stared at the mark, realization sinking in like ice. She had wanted to save him, but in doing so, she had tied herself to a curse older than time. The wind howled through the clearing and, above them, the clouds parted just long enough for the moon to bathe them in its cold light. She looked at Kale unconscious in her arms and whispered, "Then we'll face him together." But deep within the forest, somewhere far to the north, another voice stirred. Low, ancient and aware, the Alpha King had heard. The night after the mark was given, the forest no longer slept. Every rustle, every sigh of wind through the leaves felt alive with watching eyes. Elara had kept Kale within the cabin, tending his wounds through dawn and dusk, though each sunrise seemed to drain him more than heal him. The mark he'd placed upon her wrist pulsed faintly beneath her skin, warm at times, cold at others, as though sensing something beyond the world she knew. It was a bond neither of them fully understood, but she could feel him through it, his pain, his restlessness, his fear. When Kale finally stirred, his voice was rough, barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have stayed." Elara brushed damp hair from his forehead, refusing to meet his eyes. "You wouldn't have survived if I hadn't." He caught her wrist weakly, his thumb brushing over the silvered mark. "You're bound to me now. When they come for me, they'll come for you too." Her heart tightened, but her voice was steady. "Then they'll find two souls instead of one." 2 souls instead of 1. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, unnatural. The air tasted of ash long before the first smoke appeared. Kale sat up suddenly, the movement sharp enough to make her flinch. His golden eyes burned brighter. "No," he whispered. "He's found us." Before Elara could speak, the first howl tore through the forest, low and deep, shaking the walls, then another and another, until the night was alive with the chorus of wolves. The sound grew closer with every heartbeat. Kale rose unsteadily, still half broken but driven by something primal. "You get your herbs, anything you can carry. We have to move." She didn't question him. She gathered what she could, her satchel, a few dried poultices, the silver amulet. The floor trembled as the pack drew near. Then came the smell. Burning wood. Kale pushed open the door, and the sight outside stole the breath from her lungs. The forest was burning. Flames devoured the trees, their roots cracking under the heat. Smoke curled into the sky like black ribbons. The wolves were not merely hunting, they were purging. Kale's expression hardened. "They mean to flush me out. Then we go through the river," Elara said quickly. "The smoke won't follow the current." He looked at her, surprise flickering through the tension. "You'd run through fire for me?" Her answer was quiet but certain. "I already have." They fled into the night. Embers rained from the sky, glowing red against the dark. The air burned her lungs, and the sound of pursuit grew louder, the pounding of paws, the snapping of branches. Kale stayed ahead, moving with unnatural speed despite his injuries, guiding her through paths that twisted between the flames. But the wolves were closing in. She could see their eyes glinting in the firelight, hear the growl of teeth just behind. "A Kale," she gasped. "They're surrounding us." He stopped abruptly, turning to face the encroaching pack. For a moment, the light from the fire caught his profile, the tension in his jaw, the quiet fury in his gaze. "Stay behind me." The wolves emerged from the smoke, a dozen at least, their eyes like molten gold. The one in front was massive, his fur black as obsidian. When he shifted, his voice was deep, cruelly calm. "The Alpha commands a return, Kale. You will kneel before the crown or die with this mortal." Kale's voice was steady, though it trembled with rage. "Tell him I'd rather burn than bow. The words had barely left his lips before the first wolf lunged. Kale met him midair, shifting in an explosion of silver light. The two collided, claws raking, teeth snapping, the sound of battle drowned beneath the roar of flames. Elara's scream was swallowed by the storm of heat and smoke. She tried to reach him, but a wolf blocked her path, snarling. She stumbled backward, clutching her satchel like a shield. The creature leapt, only for Kale to strike it down before it touched her. his silver form shimmering with blood and fire. He turned to her, breath ragged. "A run! I'm not leaving you. A go, Laura." His voice cracked with something between command and desperation. "The mark will lead you to me, no matter where they take me." Before she could protest again, he shoved her away just as another blow sent him sprawling. The black-furred Alpha's emissary towered over him, pressing a clawed hand to Kale's throat. The forest blazed around them, turning night into hellfire. Elaura's tears mingled with the smoke as she stumbled toward the river, the sound of his struggle echoing behind her. "A Kale!" She screamed, her voice breaking, but the wind carried it away. The wolves were everywhere now, shadows within the flames. She could feel the mark on her wrist searing, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, as if begging her to keep moving. She threw herself into the river's edge just as the fire reached the bank, the water swallowing her whole. The cold bit into her skin, numbing her senses, but through the haze she could still feel him. His pain, his fury, his fading strength. She surfaced once, gasping, and turned back just long enough to see the forest she had called home consumed in fire. The cabin was gone. The sky glowed red, and above it all, the silhouette of the black Alpha stood upon the ridge, howling victory into the night. Elaura let the river carry her until the world blurred into darkness. The bond between them hummed weakly, its light dimming but not gone. Somewhere in that fading connection, she felt Kale's voice like a whisper through the storm. "Live." She clung to the sound as the current swept her farther from the burning forest, her tears lost to the water. Behind her, everything she knew turned to ash. Ahead, only silence waited, and the hollow ache of the bond that refused to break. When Elaura woke, the world was quiet. The river had carried her far from the burning forest, leaving her upon a bank of cold stones slick with dew. The air was gray with morning mist, and everything smelled of damp ash and sorrow. She pushed herself upright, shivering, her body aching from the current's pull. The memory of flames clung to her, the roar of fire, Kale's voice fading through the smoke, the wolves closing in. She looked down at her wrist, the faint silver mark still glowing faintly beneath her skin. It pulsed like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. He was alive. Somewhere, somehow, he still lived. The forest around her was unrecognizable. What had once been green was now blackened ruin. The smoke hung heavy, veiling the world in mourning. Her cabin, her herbs, the quiet life she had built, all gone. She walked aimlessly at first, her feet sinking into the wet earth, her eyes drawn to the places where embers still glowed faintly among the ashes. The silence pressed down on her chest until breathing felt like effort. It wasn't only the land that had burned, it was her sense of belonging, the fragile peace she had clung to for years. When she reached the hill overlooking what had been her home, she stopped. The clearing lay in ruin, nothing left but charred beams and a few stubborn wisps of smoke. She knelt, her fingers tracing the blackened soil where her hearth once stood. Tears blurred her vision, and a bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You promised me peace?" she whispered, though whether she spoke to Kale or to fate itself, she didn't know. For days she wandered, following the river north. Gnawed at her, but grief was stronger. Once she thought she saw movement in the distance, silver in the mist. But when she called out, only echoes answered. The mark on her wrist burned sometimes, then dulled again, a cruel reminder that he was still bound to her. Yet no matter how far she walked, she felt him slipping further away. By the fourth night, exhaustion overtook her. She built a small fire near the ruins of an old watchtower, huddling close as the flames flickered weakly against the dark. The silence around her was absolute. Even the wolves' howls had ceased, replaced by the hollow whisper of wind through the dead trees. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to find warmth, but her thoughts refused to rest. Every image of Kale returned, the way his eyes had burned gold in the firelight, the sound of his voice when he said "Lave." It haunted her as surely as the smoke still clinging to her hair. A rustle behind her made her turn sharply, heart pounding, but it was only a raven, black and sleek, perching on a nearby branch. It tilted its head as if studying her, then gave a low caw. Something glimmered in its beak, a strip of cloth, torn and blood-stained. Elaura rose, her breath catching. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, stepping closer. The bird dropped it at her feet before taking flight, vanishing into the fog. She knelt, lifting the cloth carefully. It was rough fabric, familiar in its weave, Kale's cloak. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over. On the inside, scorched into the lining, was a faint insignia, a crescent moon entwined with a crown. She traced it slowly, realizing it was not merely a mark of nobility but a sigil of the wolf kingdom itself. Her heart sank. If the wolves had taken him, he was no longer running. He was in their hands again. Elora folded the cloth and pressed it to her chest, closing her eyes. The bond between them pulsed once, faint and distant, like a heartbeat beneath deep water. "You're alive," she murmured. "You have to be." The next day, she reached the edge of the marshlands where Arvindale faded into the wild north. Travelers sometimes spoke of the mountains beyond, lands where the wolves ruled openly, unseen by human eyes. She had never believed those tales, but now the thought of turning back felt impossible. There was nothing left behind her but ash. Whatever future existed for her lay in the direction he had been taken. As dusk settled, she came upon a small group of wanderers making camp near the road. They were traders, rough and weary from travel, but one look at her soot-streaked face softened their suspicion. They gave her bread, asked few questions, and spoke quietly among themselves. "The Alpha soldiers passed through 2 nights ago," one of them said, glancing toward the north. I took a prisoner in chains. Big one. Pale eyes. Not human, that much was certain. Elara's fingers tightened around the bread. "Where were they headed?" "At the highlands," the trader replied. "To the wolf palace itself. You'll find no man who dares follow that path." She looked down, hiding the flicker of determination in her eyes. "Then I'll be the first." That night, as she lay awake beneath a blanket of coarse wool, she felt the mark on her wrist throb again. This time it wasn't pain. It was a pull, soft but certain, like a thread tugging her northward. The bond between them was calling, leading her toward him. She rose before dawn, thanking the traders and setting off alone. The air grew colder with each step, the trees taller and darker. Mist clung to the ground, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a faint silver light broke through the clouds. She followed it without hesitation. Each mile carried her farther from the ruins of her old life and deeper into the unknown. The silence was no longer empty. It was waiting, holding its breath for what was to come, and though she did not yet know it, the same silence lingered in the halls of the Wolf Palace, where Kale sat in chains beneath the gaze of his father, the Alpha King, who whispered through the dark, "You should never have let her live." The Wolf Kingdom rose from the mountains like a wound in the world, vast, cold, and crowned with mist. Its towers pierced the clouds, built from black stone that caught no light, and its halls were silent save for the echo of footsteps that did not belong to men. Deep beneath its walls, far from the eyes of the moon, Kale knelt in chains. The cell was carved into the heart of the mountain, lit only by the flicker of torches that burned with an unnatural blue flame. The air smelled of iron and blood. He had lost track of time. Days, perhaps weeks, had passed since the night of fire. His body had healed, as all wolves did, but his strength had not returned. The mark on his arm, the same that now lived upon Alara's wrist, burned faintly, a tether that reminded him she was alive. He could feel her at times, like a whisper brushing the edges of his mind, her fear, her grief, her unyielding will. It was both his torment and his reason to breathe. The chains were made from moonsteel, forged by his father's command. They didn't merely bind the flesh. They silenced the beast within, dulling his senses, smothering the part of him that was wolf. He had worn them once before, the night of his exile. Back then, he had torn them off and fled into the mortal world. This time, he doubted he would be given that mercy again. The sound of approaching boots broke the silence. Kale didn't raise his head, but the scent that entered the chamber made his jaw tighten. Cold, sharp, laced with power. A moment later, a figure stepped into the light. Tall, cloaked in black fur, with eyes the same molten gold as Kale's, the Alpha King. "Son," Regan said, his voice carrying the calm of thunder before it breaks. "It seems the mortal world has not taught you obedience." Kale's reply came out rough, his throat raw from disuse. "You call it obedience. I call it slavery." Regan's mouth curved faintly, but it wasn't a smile. "You were born to serve the moon's will, to lead as it commands, yet you ran from it. Ran from me. Do you think you can escape what you are? I wasn't running from what I am," Kale said quietly. "Oh, Freen was running from what you made me." The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. "You defied your bloodline for a human." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space like a storm. "Do you know what happens when a mortal bears the mark of the moon?" Kale's muscles tensed. "Leave her out of this." Regan crouched in front of him, his golden eyes burning with cruel amusement. "I can't. She carries your bond. Every breath she takes, every heartbeat echoes here. You've tied her to our curse. You've made her one of us in spirit, but her body, her fragile, human body, won't survive long under it." Kale's heart slammed against his ribs. You're lying. The Alpha King rose slowly. You'll see for yourself soon enough. The mark will consume her from within, unless he let the word linger like bait. Unless I take it back. Kale lifted his head, meeting his father's gaze. You can't undo it. Regan's smile was sharp. I can't. Or won't. There are ways, painful ones, the kind that make you wish you'd never drawn breath. Kale strained against the chains, his voice a growl. A touch her, and I swear by the moon that even death won't save you from me. The sound that escaped Regan was a low chuckle, almost human. There it is, the fire I forged. You always were your mother's son. She too thought love could defy fate. The memory twisted in Kale's chest like a blade. He forced his gaze to the ground, refusing to give his father the satisfaction of seeing the pain in his eyes. Regan circled him once, the air thick with power. You will lead the armies when the blood moon rises, he said. Or she dies. The choice is yours. When he was gone, the silence that followed was unbearable. Kale's hands clenched until the chains bit into his wrists, drawing blood that hissed when it touched the moonsteel. He closed his eyes and reached inward, toward the bond that tethered him to Ilara. For a long time there was nothing, just emptiness and faint echoes. Then, like a heartbeat beneath the noise, he felt her again. I'm coming, her voice whispered through the bond. No matter where you are. He breathed out shakily, a sound between a laugh and a sob. Foolish, stubborn woman. She didn't understand what awaited her here. Yet part of him knew. She would come anyway. In another part of the palace, high above the dungeons, Ilara stepped through the shadowed gates. Her cloak was soaked from the climb, her face hidden beneath the hood. The scent of wolves and smoke filled the air. She kept her head low, pretending to be one of the healers summoned from the border villages. Her hands still trembled from the mark's guidance. It had led her through storm and hunger, through lands where no mortal should walk, until it brought her here, to the heart of the Alpha's stronghold. Every heartbeat she felt beneath her skin wasn't her own anymore. It was his. And though she didn't yet know it, he felt hers too, every step she took echoing like a promise in his blood. In the darkness of his cell, Kale's eyes opened. He looked toward the corridor, toward the faintest trace of her scent drifting through the air. For the first time in weeks, his pulse quickened. He didn't know if it was hope or fear, perhaps both. And somewhere deep within the mountain, the moonlight shifted, an unseen force stirring, ancient and waiting. The Alpha King had felt it too. His gaze turned toward the north, toward the halls where the mortal girl now walked unseen. So, he murmured, his voice a shadow of a smile. The healer dares to enter the wolf's den. The wolf palace loomed above her like a shadow, carved from stone, its towers lost in mist and its walls pulsing faintly with the light of the moon. Ilara's breath came shallow, each exhale clouding the cold air as she crossed the threshold. The heavy gates closed behind her with a sound that echoed through the courtyard like a warning. She pulled her hood tighter, trying to hide the trembling of her hands. The scent of wolf hung everywhere, earth and iron, and something wild that made the air hum with invisible power. Inside, the corridors were alive with whispers and the soft click of boots on polished stone. Wolves in human form moved through the hallways, some bearing the insignia of the Alpha's crest. A silver crescent over a blood-red moon. They barely glanced at her as she passed, taking her for one of the healers summoned to tend the wounded from the border battles. The mark on her wrist was covered with linen, but beneath the bandage, it pulsed faintly, guiding her deeper into the heart of the stronghold. She kept her head bowed, mimicking the subservient grace she had seen in the castle servants. She passed outside the gate. Every step felt like walking deeper into the jaws of a beast that hadn't yet decided whether to devour her. The bond between her and Kale grew stronger with each turn she took. Sharp pulses of heat that guided her left when she might have gone right, or stopped her when danger brushed too close. He was near, and somewhere beneath these walls, he lived. She passed through a corridor lined with silver braziers, each one burning a pale flame. The light flickered against murals painted in blood and moonlight, scenes of battles between wolves and men, of kings crowned in fur and fangs. Her heart pounded as she walked, her boots silent against the stone. She could almost hear his voice, low and strained, like a whisper carried on the wind. Turn back, Ilara. You shouldn't be here. But she didn't. She couldn't. When she reached the lower levels, the air grew colder, the scent of damp stone and iron filling her lungs. Guards stood by the stairwell that led into the dungeon. Their eyes were sharp, their stances relaxed but ready. Ilara lowered her gaze, clutching the basket of herbs she carried. a disguise she'd taken from the healer's quarters. As she approached, one of the guards stepped forward. "State your business." Her voice was soft, steady despite the fear pounding in her chest. "Orders from the High Warden. They said to tend to the prisoner in the moon cells. He's been refusing food." The guard studied her for a moment, suspicion flickering in his gaze. "You're not one of the usual healers." She forced herself to meet his eyes, the faintest tremor of defiance in her tone. But do the usual healers still breathe after stepping into his cell? A pause, then a faint smirk tugged at the man's lips. "Brave, are you? Fine. Go on. If he kills you, I'll send someone to collect what's left." Elara bowed slightly and slipped past. The stairway descended into shadow, the air thick with the scent of rust and moonsteel. Each step echoed softly, like the beating of her own heart. When she reached the bottom, she saw him. Kale, chained to the stone floor, his body bruised and bloodied, his head bowed. For a moment, the sight froze her in place. He looked nothing like the man she had last seen. His silver hair matted, his skin marked with wounds that hadn't fully healed. But the mark on his arm still glowed faintly, the same silver hue that lived beneath her skin. She set the basket down and knelt before him. "A Kale," she whispered. His head lifted slowly, his golden eyes dull but alive. For a second, disbelief flickered across his face. "No," he rasped. "You shouldn't be here." Her hand brushed his cheek, gentle but firm. "I told you I'd find you." He closed his eyes, his voice breaking. "Do you know what they'll do if they see you?" "I don't care," she said softly. "You once told me I shouldn't have saved you. Maybe this is why I did." The faintest hint of a smile ghosted his lips, pained but real. "You shouldn't have to bear this. You shouldn't have to bear this." His gaze flicked to her wrist, where the mark beneath the linen glowed faintly. "He knows you're here, Elara." The moment our bond stirred, he felt it. "I'll leave once I freed you." She reached for the chains, but the moment her fingers touched them, a jolt of pain shot through her hand. She gasped, pulling back as the metal hissed faintly, the moonsteel searing her skin. Kale's hand caught hers, his touch weak but grounding. "It's no use. They forged them in my father's blood. They only yield to his command." "Ethan will find another way," she said, determination hardening her tone. "No, there has to be someone here who'd help us. There is no one here without loyalty to him," Kale murmured. "And if they discover who you are, if they smell you on me, it will be your death, not mine." Elara swallowed hard, but she didn't step back. "Then they'll have to kill me to stop me." The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Heavy, deliberate. Kale tensed instantly. "Ago," he whispered urgently. His father stood above him, hands outstretched, chanting in a language that made the air tremble. She barely noticed the guards at first, half a dozen of them forming a circle around Kale. Their eyes were fixed on the ritual, bodies swaying slightly as if caught in trance. The air pulsed with energy, the ground humming beneath her feet. Regan's voice grew louder. "By the blood of the Alpha line, I bind thee to the moon's will. The heir who defied the call shall return as its vessel." Kale's body arched, a sound of agony tearing from his throat. The mark on Elara's wrist flared in response, searing white-hot. She bit down a cry, pressing a hand over it as the bond forced his pain through her veins. "Stop it," she whispered, though the words barely left her lips. Please, stop." The energy in the room intensified, the red light of the moon swirling downward like smoke, wrapping around Kale's body. The chains rattled, glowing brighter, as if feeding on the magic. Regan's eyes glowed the same crimson hue, his voice a thunderclap now. "Rise, my son. Rise, Alpha Reborn." Elara couldn't wait any longer. She threw open the door and stepped into the light. The guards turned instantly, snarls ripping from their throats, but she moved before they could react. The dagger flashed in her hand as she struck one across the face, ducking under another's claws. She felt the wind of their blows tear strands of hair from her head. The mark burned hotter, flooding her body with borrowed strength. "Enough!" she shouted. The sound cut through the ritual like a blade. Regan turned, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Ah," he said softly, his smile chilling. "The healer. The curse made flesh." Kale's head snapped up at her voice. "Elara, no." The Alpha King moved faster than she could see, his hand closing around her throat. His strength was inhuman. Her feet barely touched the floor as he lifted her effortlessly. "You should not have come here, mortal." His gaze flicked to her wrist, where the mark blazed through the bandage. "Ah, so this is what my son's rebellion bought him, a fragile heart bound to his own ruin." He pressed his palm against her wrist, and a scream tore from her lips as the mark flared. The bond between her and Kale surged, wild and uncontrolled. Kale's chains shattered with a sound like shattering glass. He lunged forward, his roar shaking the walls. The world seemed to explode. Stone cracking, fire bursting from the torches, the blood moon's light turning blinding white. Regan released her, spinning just as Kale collided with him. The two wolves crashed into each other, claws and fangs flashing, the air vibrating with the force of their power. Elara stumbled backward, her vision swimming. The energy from the bond pulsed through her like a storm, his fury, his pain, his desperate need to protect her. They moved too fast to follow, their forms shifting between man and beast, silver and black clashing under the crimson sky. Each blow shook the chamber. Kale was strong, but his father was centuries older, each strike precise and brutal. Regan pinned him at last, his claws digging into Kale's chest. "You think love can unmake what the moon itself has decreed?" he hissed. Kale's blood stained the stone, but his eyes burned gold. "Oh no," he rasped, "but it can defy it." Elara didn't think, she moved. Grabbing the fallen dagger, she drove it into the base of the chain still wrapped around Kale's arm. The moon steel hissed, sparks flaring. The energy snapped like a severed thread. A blast of light filled the room, hurling her backward. When the glare faded, Regan staggered, clutching his chest where a jagged wound now glowed with molten light. Kale rose slowly, his chains gone, his body blazing with silver fire. "You taught me to bow," he said, his voice echoing with both man and beast. "And now watch me stand." Regan's eyes widened as Kale struck. One final blow. Driven not by rage but by will, the Alpha King fell, the power of the blood moon spilling from him in a torrent of light that shook the mountain itself. Elara crawled to Kale's side, her heart breaking at the sight of his blood, mixing with his father's. "Kale," she whispered, her hand trembling as it reached for him. He caught her fingers weakly, his voice fading. "It's over," he breathed. "Up at the cost." "Don't," she said softly, tears cutting through the soot on her cheeks. "Don't say it." He smiled faintly, eyes dimming but warm. "You came into the den of wolves and survived." "And I'd do it again," she whispered. The moonlight dimmed, the crimson hue fading into pale silver. The Alpha King's throne lay empty. And in that hollow silence, the bond between them flickered like a dying flame, unsure whether it would burn or fade. The palace trembled beneath the dying pulse of the blood moon. The red light that had stained the world began to fade, leaving only the cold gleam of dawn spilling through the shattered ceiling. Smoke curled upward from the broken torches, and the air reeked of blood, stone, and magic. Elara knelt beside Kale where he had fallen, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound in his chest. The glow of the moonfire still lingered beneath his skin, flickering weakly like a candle struggling against the wind. He was breathing, but faintly. Each breath sounded fragile like something borrowed. "A Kale," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Stay with me, please." His eyes fluttered open, gold dimmed to bronze. "It's over," he murmured, his voice little more than a rasp. "He's gone, more than a rasp, he's gone. Oh." She tore a strip of her cloak and pressed it harder against the wound, but the blood kept seeping through her fingers. "I'll let me heal you." He shook his head weakly. "You can't. The moonfire runs through it. It burns anything mortal." "I'm not just mortal anymore," she said fiercely. "You made sure of that." Her wrist still glowed faintly with the mark of their bond, though the silver light had dimmed since the battle. She placed her hand over his heart, ignoring the pain that flared where her skin met his. The energy that connected them surged again, wild and bright. For a moment, the light between them grew until the world blurred into silver and white. Kale's breath caught. The pain in her wrist seared through her veins, but she didn't stop. She poured every fragment of strength she had left into him, every heartbeat, every ounce of will. The mark burned brighter, then steadied. His chest rose sharply, a gasp pulling through his lips. When the light faded, his wounds were no longer bleeding. The edges were raw but closed, glowing faintly beneath his skin. Elara slumped forward, drained. Kale caught her before she could fall, his arms weak but still protective. "Foolish," he murmured, his voice soft but alive again. "Oko, you shouldn't have done that." She smiled faintly against his shoulder. "You'd have done the same." He huffed a quiet laugh that turned into a sigh. "You don't know what it means now. The bond is sealed. The moon won't take me, but it won't let you go either." "I don't care," she whispered. "As long as you live." The chamber around them was silent now, save for the soft drip of blood on stone. Regan's body lay still beneath the throne, the once mighty Alpha reduced to dust and shadow beneath the returning light. Outside, the first howls of the new dawn echoed faintly, wolves mourning the death of their king. Their cries low and uncertain. The power that had ruled them for centuries was broken, and in its place a new quiet settled over the world. Kale looked toward the open ceiling, where the pale light of the morning moon hung above the clouds. "It's strange," he murmured. "For so long, I dreamed of killing him, of ending it all. But now that it's done," his voice faded, his expression distant. Elara followed his gaze. "What happens now?" He was silent for a moment before answering. "The bloodline's curse still runs through me. The packs will come for me. They'll demand an alpha. And if I refuse, they'll tear you apart." She finished quietly. He nodded once. "The moon doesn't forgive rebellion, but maybe," he looked at her then, his eyes softening, "maybe it can forgive love." He reached for her hand, his fingers tracing the silver mark on her wrist. "This bond, it shouldn't exist. No mortal has ever carried it and lived. And yet, you do, and because I chose to," she said simply. "And because you needed me." He smiled faintly, something breaking in his expression, something between gratitude and sorrow. "You've always been braver than I deserved." The light outside grew stronger, and with it came a strange stillness, a shift in the air that made the hair on her arms rise. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, this time softly, gently. It wasn't pain now. It was warmth. She looked down and saw the faint shimmer of silver threads stretching from her hand to his chest, binding them like woven light. "What is that?" she whispered. Kale's eyes widened slightly. "The moon's promise." He said it as though speaking a legend. "It's a vow sealed by the bond between wolf and mortal. The moon doesn't allow such unions, but if it chooses to spare one, it blesses them instead. It's rare, so rare I thought it was only myth." The threads pulsed once and then slowly faded, sinking back into their skin. A calm washed through her, deep and quiet. "Does that mean?" He nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "It means we've been given time. Not freedom. Not forever, but time." She exhaled shakily, her tears finally breaking free. "Then we'll use it. Every heartbeat." Kale's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. "There will be others who seek the throne. They won't stop until one of us claims it. But for now," he looked toward the fading moon, the corners of his lips lifting softly. "For now, we rest." Elara leaned into his touch, her exhaustion pressing against her like a tide. The scent of smoke lingered in the air, but beneath it, something new was taking root. The faint fragrance of rain-soaked earth, of renewal. As dawn broke over the shattered palace, Kale gathered what strength remained and rose, pulling her gently to her feet. Their steps echoed across the ruined floor as they made their way toward the open gate. The wind carried away the last traces of ash, and for the first time since the fire that destroyed her home, Elara looked out upon a world that was not burning. The mark on her wrist glowed once more, steady and serene. Kale looked at it, then at her. "Whatever comes next," he said softly. "The moon may rule the sky, but it no longer owns me." Elara smiled faintly, her voice quiet as the dawn. "Then let it watch, Kale. Inisto, let it see what love can build from the ashes." They walked out together, the rising sun painting gold across the horizon, the shadows of the past falling behind them. And though neither spoke again, the bond between them sang with quiet promise, its rhythm the sound of two hearts learning to beat in the same light. The sun was high when they reached the edge of the mountains, its light breaking through the thinning mist. Elara paused, breathing in air that no longer carried the stench of smoke or blood. Behind them, the wolf palace lay silent, its towers shattered, its banners torn, the reign of the old Alpha reduced to dust and memory. Yet the silence that followed victory was not peace. It was the breath before consequence. Kale stood a few paces ahead, his cloak billowing faintly in the wind. His wounds had closed, but the weight of the throne he had refused still lingered in his stance. The wolves had lost their king, and soon, the call for a new one would echo across every mountain and valley. Elara could feel it, fate already tightening its grip around them again. They walked until the shadows lengthened. At dusk, they stopped beside a ridge overlooking the vast forests of the north. The scent of pine and frost filled the air. Kale watched the horizon in silence, his gaze distant, troubled. "You're thinking of them," she said softly. "How come?" he murmured. "The packs are bound to the bloodline. They'll demand I lead, whether I want it or not. Or not. The moon won't allow a throne to stay empty for long. And if you refuse..." He looked at her, the gold in his eyes catching the fading light. "Then the war begins again. Wolves will fight wolves, and the world will burn once more." Elara stepped closer, her voice steady despite the unease coiling in her chest. "Then you have your answer. End the war before it starts. Be the king who doesn't rule by fear." Kale turned away, his jaw tight. "You don't understand what that means, Elura. My father's throne isn't built on mercy, it's built on blood. Every pack that kneels will test me. Every rival will seek to destroy what remains. If I rise, I become the very thing I swore to end." She reached for his hand. "It'd then change it. Rewrite what it means to be alpha." He looked at her for a long moment, something flickering behind his guarded expression. "Hope, maybe, or disbelief. You speak as if it's that simple." "It isn't," she admitted, "but it's the only way forward." The wind howled softly around them, carrying faint echoes from the valley below. Wolves gathering, restless and uncertain. Kale's posture shifted, his shoulders straightening. The call of the packs thrummed faintly through the air, not yet a challenge but an expectation. He could hear them even from here. They were waiting. As night fell, the first moon of the new age rose over the horizon, silver and full. Its light bathed the world in quiet radiance, no longer red but pure and pale. Elura felt the bond between them stir again, the mark on her wrist glowing faintly in answer to the pull that coursed through Kale. He closed his eyes, his voice low. "It's calling me again. Not the curse. Something different. The moon itself." She nodded slowly. "You then answer it. But this time on your terms." He hesitated, then stepped away from her, walking to the edge of the ridge. The moonlight washed over him, painting his silver hair with light. For a heartbeat, he stood motionless, the wind curling around him like the breath of the world itself. Then he tilted his head back and let out a long, low howl that carried through the night, deep, resonant, unbroken. The sound rolled across the mountains like thunder, ancient and commanding. The answering howls came almost instantly, from near, from far, from every direction. Dozens, then hundreds, joining his in unison. The forest trembled with it. Elura watched, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. Power radiated from him, not the kind born of domination, but of truth, something the wolves had long forgotten. His shadow stretched across the ridge, vast and luminous in the moonlight. When he turned back to her, his eyes gleamed gold, but softer now, as though the fire within had found purpose instead of fury. "It's done," he said quietly. "They've accepted me." A shiver ran through her, part awe, part fear. "Then you're their king." "For now," he murmured. "Until peace either holds or breaks again." He approached her, and for a moment, the distance between them disappeared. The wolf and the healer, the curse and its cure. "I never wanted a crown," he said. "Neat, but if I must wear one, then it will be for the ones who never had a choice." Elura smiled faintly. "And for her." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Always for her." The forest below began to quiet, the echo of howls fading into silence. A soft wind rose, carrying the scent of rain and soil. Kale lifted his gaze once more to the moon. "There will be those who challenge me. Those who believe strength is the only law. But I will not rule as he did. Not with chains, not with fire." Elura stepped beside him, her hand slipping into his. "But then how will you rule?" He looked down at her, his voice gentle. "With balance. With faith. With you." She felt tears sting her eyes but didn't look away. The bond between them pulsed warmly, not burning this time but steady, alive. The moon's promise glowed faintly beneath their skin, a symbol of what they had survived, and what they would now build. Below them, the first of the wolves emerged from the tree-line. Dozens of silver forms gathering in the open, heads bowed low. One by one they knelt, their submission not to fear but to respect. Kale's grip tightened around her hand. "Ah, Luna," he said softly. Elura's heart skipped, though her voice was calm. And what would she be? His lips curved faintly, and not a queen to stand behind her king, but beside him, Steelwolcock. The moonlight deepened, its silver hue spilling across them both. In that quiet moment, with the world holding its breath, Kale turned toward the horizon. No longer the exile, no longer the cursed sun, but the Alpha reborn under the promise of dawn. And beside him, the healer who had once saved a dying wolf took her place, not as a shadow in his story, but as the light that had rewritten it. The nights that followed were quieter than any Elura had ever known. The forest, once filled with the howls of restless wolves, had fallen into an uneasy peace. The moon hung pale and still over the mountains, its light no longer crimson, but soft as breath. From the newly rebuilt halls of the Wolf Palace, Kale ruled not as a conqueror, but as a guardian, his voice carried not by command, but by presence. The packs had accepted him, bound by more than blood or fear. They had seen what he had done, how he had broken the chain that enslaved them to a cruel legacy. Yet power, even earned through sacrifice, came with a cost that neither he nor Ilara could ignore. She watched him from the courtyard one evening, the cold wind stirring his cloak as he spoke with the elders. They stood before the silver brazier that marked the heart of the new reign, its flames steady beneath the moon. His tone was calm, deliberate, but beneath it she could hear the fatigue, the weight of decisions no heart could carry without splintering. When the council finally dispersed, Kale lingered, his gaze distant as though searching for something beyond the horizon. Ilara approached softly. Softly. "You haven't rested." He turned toward her, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "And neither of you. I'm not the one holding a kingdom together. And I'm not the one who brought it back to life," he replied gently. "Every healer's hand leaves a mark, even if the world never sees it." She looked away, her heart tightening. The days since the battle had been filled with rebuilding, burned villages restored, wounded wolves tended, fragile truces drawn between packs. But though the world outside was healing, something inside her still ached. The bond between them had grown quieter, its warmth steady, yet sometimes she felt it pulse with loneliness. A reminder that though they stood side by side, their paths were not the same. "You've given them peace," she said quietly. "But what about yourself?" Kale's gaze softened, his voice low. "A peace and I have never walked the same road. But I can live with that if it means no one else will bleed for my father's sins." She reached up, brushing her fingers lightly over his arm where the faint glow of the alpha mark rested beneath his skin. "You're still bleeding," she murmured. "Just differently." He caught her hand gently, pressing it to his chest. "And you're still saving what can't be saved." They stood in silence for a moment, the firelight flickering between them. The air smelled of pine and snow, the kind of cold that whispered of endings and beginnings. Somewhere beyond the walls, a wolf's distant cry rose, soft and mournful. Ilara finally broke the silence. He said, "Return to Arvindale. The humans there will need help rebuilding after the fires. They've lost everything." Kale's expression shifted, quiet but pained. "You would leave?" Her heart twisted at the question. "I have to. It's where I belong." He said nothing for a moment, the wind stirring between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but threaded with something fragile. "Then the moon will lose its light for a while." She smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. "You've learned how to speak like a king." "I learned from you," he said softly. The world around them felt suspended, the weight of choice pressing between one heartbeat and the next. She looked up at him, at the man who had once been the wounded wolf bleeding beneath the rain, and saw now what he had become, the Alpha King, forged by pain, but tempered by love. And yet beneath all that power, he was still the same soul who had once looked at her as though she were the first warmth he had ever known. "When I found you," she whispered, "I didn't know I was finding the end of my own story too." He shook his head gently. "No, Ilara, you found the beginning of mine." For a moment, neither moved. The fire between them flickered higher, the reflection dancing in their eyes. Then Kale reached into his cloak and drew out something small, a pendant wrought of silver and bone, carved into the shape of a crescent moon entwined with a vine. "This was my mother's," he said. "As she believed the moon guided every soul, even those who defied it. I think she would have liked you." Ilara took it carefully, her fingers brushing his. The pendant was warm, pulsing faintly with a life of its own. "I'll keep it safe," she said. His gaze lingered on her, heavy with all the words neither of them could speak. "If you ever call my name," he said quietly, "I'll hear it, no matter where I am." She swallowed the ache rising in her chest and nodded. "And if you ever forget who you are, remember what it cost you to be free." Kale smiled, small and sincere. "I could never forget. You're carved into every scar." The night deepened around them, stars glimmering faintly through the mist. She turned away first, walking toward the gate where her horse waited. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the bond itself resisted letting go. When she reached the archway, she looked back one final time. Kale stood where she had left him, the firelight painting gold across his face, his expression unreadable but alive with quiet understanding. The wind shifted, carrying her scent through the air. Kale closed his eyes, the faintest smile touching his lips. "A farewell, healer," he murmured. "Until the moon calls again." Ilara's answer was carried on the wind, soft but certain. "A goodbye, my king." She rode into the forest, the silver pendant resting against her heart. its warmth steady. The moon followed her path through the trees, silent and watchful, its light falling gently on the road that stretched between two hearts bound by promise, distance, and love that no curse could ever undo. Seasons passed, and the world began to heal. The forest that once burned now grew green again, its trees stretching toward the sky as though nothing had ever scarred them. The rivers ran clear, the winds carried laughter instead of war cries, and the wolves of the northern mountains lived under a peace they had never known. Yet in that peace the memory of all that was lost lingered, soft as breath, deep as time. Elara's hands were never still. She rebuilt the healer's cottage near the edge of Arvindale, where wildflowers grew between stones, and sunlight spilled through the windows she carved herself. The villagers came to her once more, not in fear, but in gratitude, bringing baskets of bread, woven blankets, and stories of how the king of wolves no longer brought nightmares but hope. They called him the Silver Alpha now, the guardian of balance, the keeper of quiet. She never corrected them. She only smiled, and when the moon rose each night, she would step outside and look toward the mountains. The silver pendant he had given her still hung around her neck. But the bond remained, subtle and unbroken, like a thread woven through her soul. Years moved gently, not swiftly. The scars on the land faded, but the memory of that night, the fire, the chains, the red light of the blood moon, never left her. Yet it no longer haunted her. It lived inside her as something holy, a mark of everything love could survive. She grew older, though the moon's blessing left her untouched by time's cruelty. Her hair shimmered faintly with silver under the starlight now, her eyes carrying the calm of one who had known both ruin and rebirth. Sometimes travelers came from the north, bearing word from the mountains. They spoke of a lone wolf who walked the ridges at dusk, his eyes bright as molten gold. His presence neither feared nor followed but revered. They said he had built no throne, worn no crown, yet every pack that saw him bowed in silence. The story said he was searching, and not for power, but for something he had lost long ago. Elara never asked their names. She would only thank them softly and watch the road long after they'd gone. Then when night came, she would light a single candle by her window and whisper to the wind, "I'm still here." And sometimes, though faint, the forest would answer. A howl would rise from the distance, low and steady, and she would close her eyes, smiling through the tears that never quite fell. The bond would warm again in her wrist, once, twice, and then fade back into stillness. The years blurred into decades. The stories became legends. The legends became myth. Children grew up hearing tales of the healer and the wolf king who defied the moon's curse, whose love had turned an empire of beasts into a kingdom of balance. But to Elara, it was never myth. It was memory. She felt it in every heartbeat, in every breath of the forest that still whispered his name. One evening, when the sky burned orange with the last fire of sunset, Elara sat by her garden, trimming the lavender that grew wild among the stones. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of earth and pine. She hummed softly to herself, the same lullaby she once sang beside a dying wolf in the rain. Weddings, and as the sun sank below the horizon, she felt it, the faintest warmth blooming against her wrist. Her breath caught. Slowly, she rose and turned toward the forest. The trees stood still, the air quiet. But in that silence came a sound, a single step soft against the leaves. Her heart stumbled. Out from the fading light came a figure. His hair was silver now, longer than she remembered, his shoulders broad beneath a cloak of gray. The golden eyes she had once thought she would never see again met hers, steady and familiar. He said nothing at first, only stood there, watching her as though afraid to break the fragile moment between them. Elara's lips trembled into a smile. "You took your time," she whispered. Kale's answering smile was quiet but real. "I had to make sure the world could live without us first." She laughed softly, tears shimmering in her eyes. And can it? He stepped closer, the moonlight catching in his hair. It lived, but it never learned how to breathe. When he reached her, he took her hand gently, tracing the faint mark that still glowed beneath her skin. "It never faded," he murmured. "It was never meant to," she replied. The world around them hushed. The forest seemed to bow, the air trembling softly as if recognizing the return of something it had long awaited. Kale's thumb brushed the pulse at her wrist, and for the first time in years, the bond between them flared fully alive. Not as fire, but as light, gentle and endless. Neither spoke after that. Words were too small for what lived in the space between their heartbeats. The years melted away, and for one perfect moment, time itself seemed to stop. They stood together beneath the quiet sky, no longer alpha and healer, curse and cure, but simply two souls who had found each other again, proof that even the moon, with all its cold eternity, could not silence love that was written beyond its reach. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.